Hey, what's going on, you guys? This is book review number 32. Sarah Vowell's Unfamiliar Fishes. Sarah Vowell. Let's see if we can get a picture of her. Right there. It's kind of a celebrity historian, or as much as one can be. But anyway, Unfamiliar Fishes is a book about the early history of Hawaii. Specifically from Captain Cook's first visit there in the 1790s through about the 1890s. I think it's actually 1889 when Hawaii was ceded as a territory to the United States, ceasing to become an independent kingdom. Well, anyway, what do I think about this book? It was pretty good. It really showed the differences, cultural differences between Native Hawaiians and Northeastern Protestant, not pilgrims, but Puritans, strident religious folk. And as I said, the peoples of the Hawaiian Islands. Essentially, the first settlements, the first visit in Hawaii was by Captain Cook, and it only briefly mentions that. It's actually where Captain Cook was killed by a spear in a battle on the big island of Hawaii. But the first settlement were Christian missionaries, actually, that basically didn't really know anything about the Hawaiian Islands, but much like 17th century, or I guess it would be 18th century missionaries around the world, even 19th century, just felt that the word of God should move the heathens into correct action. And basically, like when they first got there, as would kind of be expected, the Americans or they sailed out of Connecticut. Basically, the areas they came from were the New England, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. And when they first sailed to Hawaii, initially there was some decent contact. There was still a lot of kind of looking down upon the peoples, but because the number of the missionaries was so small, there was sort of a symbiotic relationship. It should also be said that the Hawaiian peoples actually accepted the missionaries quite fervently. The missionaries couldn't have chose a better time to visit the Hawaiian Islands because the native religious belief around the king, and I forget exactly what his name, but it's like all the norms and mores, the cultural glue of the society was coming apart because the current king actually rejected the ancestor worship, not completely, but reformed the ancestor worship of what was going on at that time period. It should also be said that the Hawaiian kingdom only existed from about year 1000, or was only settled from about year 1000, and was really a set of tribes on these various islands until it was unified only about 50 years before white settlement. So while there was certainly a history of native settlement there, and there should also be really the native Hawaiians should be looked at as the heirs to the land, as the first settlers. It's not like they had been there for tens of thousands of years. It was more recently than that. But as I said, the current king, who I think was the son of the king that unified all of the Hawaiian Islands, actually took away some of these ancestor worships that exist before the islands were unified. And so in this void came these New Englanders, their Christian religion, and the void was filled. Now, that being said, the Hawaiian Islanders slowly gave up in material what they were given in any sort of spiritual guidance given by the settlers. At first, it was just basically like basic plots for the farmers, but then, of course, the big industry that came around into Hawaii was sugarcane, and sugarcane was actually what brought the interest of the United States as a national body, as a governmental body, rather than just like some religious groups, individual churches, into the fray. And I guess the other big industry at that time period was whaling. So oil didn't really, I think until the late 1800s, early 1900s, become the predominant source of fuel around the world, be it in lamps or lighting, all that kind of stuff. But it was really whale's blubber that almost extinct the whale population that really, led to there was really the fuel power of the world that was really sort of the wall socket of the world. And of course, the Hawaiian Islands, being in the middle of the Pacific, attracted sailor boats and individual whaling companies. And actually, one of the better parts of the book is, in this book, Sarah kind of goes on and on about at least in the first, I don't know, it's only a 200-page book, but I'd probably say in the first 70 to 80 pages, largely about all these religious groups and how they differentiated and how they were the same and what they specifically believed in. But then you brought in the whalers, and those were the good old heathen, sex-crazed, men on the boat, whalers on the boat, sailors on the boat. And the book got really good then because it really kind of showed the dichotomy of not merely the whites and the native Hawaiians, but whites versus other whites. And actually, at one point, the Protestant, or the religious, I guess you should say, settlers, missionaries, asked the U.S. government to bring a warship in to specifically prevent soldiers from landing. Like, they brought this warship in to stop another whaling boat from landing in port, specifically because they knew when it landed in port, all the sailors would come off and run away with all the Hawaiian women who, while having their own moral values, in Hawaii at the time, it should be said that there was a sense of lasciviousness, I think that's the right word, or just general ease about casual sex, about casual relations, that goes from the king all the way to the most smallest peasants. And I guess that actually turns me to back to the sugarcane and back to how the it turns me back to sugarcane and how the United States came to incorporate Hawaii into its territory. That's good. What was happening around the 1860s in the United States was actually the Civil War. Now, if you know anything about sugarcane, you know that sugarcane has to grow in warm tropical climates. Well, of course, with the Civil War, that eliminates Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, all these southern states that have the potential to produce at least some sugarcane. So what did the Union do but turn to Hawaii? Now, during the Civil War, it should be said that it was primarily a trade operation. It wasn't an invasion at that point, but because the ties just became stronger and stronger and stronger, and sort of the culture of Hawaii was more embedded into sugarcane production. Eventually, what it led to 20 years later was the downfall of the king and the rise of, the United States in that country, and eventually the establishment. So, what kind of happened with the downfall was they had this. First of all, the kings in Hawaii during times of white settlement, one, became less powerful, but two, were intentionally chosen. And in Hawaii, sometimes they choose their kings. Sometimes it's a bloodline, sometimes they choose. But were intentionally sort of like pushed to have weaker and weaker kings that the sugarcane oligarchies, and that's really what they were. It was about 3, 4, 5 companies that controlled, 80% of the economy of Hawaii during that time period. Slowly pushed the kings to become weaker and weaker and weaker, until the final one really was concerned with very little except accruing his own personal wealth, having plenty of women around him, plenty of drink, classic downfalls of a king. And the oligarchies used this, as well as befriending him to a number of whites who would later turn on him, to eventually overthrow the king. Now, what happened was that king eventually died, and I got a phone call. That king eventually died. Yeah. That king eventually died, in which case the person that rose into power was a princess. But the oligarchies claimed that she was not the rightful heir because she was kind of a third cousin, and said that there was no more line, in which case, in that void of power, once again, just like the void of religious power, the United States government stepped in. Overall, this is a pretty good book. Sarah Vowell's pretty well known. She did talk pretty extensively about the Northeastern religions, and specifically about how this group was kind of a fundamentalist sect group that sent, they weren't Lutherans, they were kind of quackos. It kind of just shows the tragic history of Hawaii. It's not tragic in like the way that the Holocaust might be tragic, but it's tragic in a way that's like a slow decline of a culture and sort of a subsumption of a culture by another culture for a specific purpose. Just sort of, it's not that necessarily the Americans were wrong, but it's just sort of, or that they were they were maybe wrong, but that they were really egregious. But it was really more like the missionaries would come in and they would just hammer home their religion. Not necessarily killing people and not necessarily enslaving them or anything like that, but just sort of religion. Or, other people come in and were like, they're going to take over the country. So anyway, unfamiliar fishes. All right, bye you guys.